Welcome to Service Titans, the podcast where we dive deep into the inspiring journeys of Black men within the AmeriCorps community. From serving in classrooms to rebuilding neighborhoods, these are the stories of passion, purpose, and resilience. Join us as we amplify the voices of members of the AmeriCorps community and share their triumphs, challenges, and the impact they've made in their communities. Whether you're a seasoned AmeriCorps veteran or someone considering service, this is the space to explore, reflect, and be inspired. Get ready to be uplifted, empowered, and connected. This is Service Titans.
What up, though? This is Service Titans, the show where we discuss the stories, experiences, and insights of remarkable individuals who are making a difference in their communities and beyond. I'm your host, Anton Taylor, and on today's episode, our guest is Emmanuel Rivera. He is someone who has dedicated his career to creating meaningful change, from working as an employer and job development specialist at California State Long Beach to co-founding Nature-Wise Regenerative Design. Emmanuel has spent years developing sustainable systems that support community impact. He's also spent time at Boeing, where he worked with power subsystems. We connected during our time at Cityyear. But beyond his professional accomplishments, this guest has had a profound impact on me personally. Emmanuel introduced me to meditation, a practice that has completely reshaped how I approach life, leadership, and personal growth. He also introduced me to the Getting Things Done method, or GTD, which has become such a pivotal part of how I stay organized, manage priorities, and navigate multiple responsibilities. Even to the point that I painfully tried to teach my kids how to use it. And if anybody who has teenagers probably can figure out how that went. But nevertheless, these tools have not only improved my focus, but have helped me remain intentional in all aspects of my life. I'm truly grateful for his influence, and I'm excited to welcome Emmanuel Rivera to Service Titans. Welcome, Emmanuel.
Hey, thank you so much, Anton.
I want to get into, just start with talking a little bit about your background. And I said a little bit about your experience over the years, but I really want to dive into this dynamic career that you've had, spanning from service to sustainability, education, and even in the aerospace. Emmanuel, what about your experiences, or whether that's early in life or just in general, helped shape your passions and your journey to this point?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think maybe it just starts with growing up. I was born and raised in Chicago. My mom and dad looked out for me. They both were working. My dad worked in public services. He was a caseworker for people who needed food stamps. So, year in, year out, he was helping a lot of people who were kind of at the end of their rope, getting on track. And my mom worked in a grocery store. So she was a cashier. So she was always around people, always out front, and just always in the community. Having their support growing up, they definitely modeled to me, I think, the importance of service, but also they really did a lot to keep me and my sister safe. So we grew up in the hood in Chicago. I actually wasn't allowed out of the house past 5 p.m. on my own until second to last week of high school. So pretty much I'm indoors studying, reading, playing video games, learning, but I didn't really have a chance to explore a lot in the social spaces. So it wasn't until I went to college that I actually got to try a lot of different things. And I think that kind of led to me wanting to explore a lot of different topics, ideas, and just kind of get out there. Because growing up, I didn't necessarily have the space to do that. And in a loving way, it was to really support and protect me. But it really, developed a passion to want to experience a lot. And that kind of led me in a lot of different career pathways in college and afterwards.
Now, I think that in some ways speaks to some of the ills and, unfortunately, many inner cities across the country. And I'm sure we can go on and on about that. But I think it also highlights the importance of the community and people who created loving environments for you and what that can mean for a young person. But I know we met during our time at Cityyear, and I know you committed a pretty significant portion of your career there with Cityyear and just under the AmeriCorps umbrella in itself. I'll just sort of say that. So could you speak a little bit about what led you to that work and what was their experience like for you? And I know you were both on the staff side, but also as an AmeriCorps member. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, thanks. I guess picking up in college, I was on more of an engineering track, to your point about aerospace, and I got experience working with Boeing and doing some of that work. And I kind of reached this point from those experiences, not, throwing any shade on like people who are into that work, but for me, it just wasn't the right fit. Like I felt like I wasn't doing anything that was making a positive impact. And I think having that example, my parents, also just personally, my growth and development, I was really seeing like, man, there has to be more to the world. And that kind of was leading me on a kind of an inner search, and for me, it was a spiritual search that coincided with my work search, and they kind of all culminated with being like, wait, I can't do this. I can't work in, aerospace. I need to work with something that's helping people. And that had me look for opportunities for service, and also led me out to California for not only the service work, but also spiritual work, the mindfulness, meditation, finding a community that I could find a connection to, the source, creator, God, whatever words, people connect with. For me, I was looking for that, and for, work that aligned with that. And all that culminated in finding City Year after I graduated college and moved from Chicago to Los Angeles. Did a year of service as a team leader in City Year. And that was just an eye-opening experience. Going through school, there was a lot of like, I thought I was a leader. I thought I was, confident doing stuff. And it wasn't until I did City Year that I really got humbled in a lot of ways. I really worked with a lot of different types of people that I never, had contact with, people of all different backgrounds, demographics, ages, genders, orientations, belief systems. And it really stretched my understanding of people and myself, and how to work with different people, and how to create space and understanding. It's a nice idea of inclusivity, but the practical reality of actually being with different people in different spaces, and what that means to respect where people come from, and but also hold on to what you value. And City Year really put me through, I would say it was just an intense training program, but a great one, where I really got to meet different folks in challenging service situations. I loved it. I loved it. It was hard. It was, there's days I woke up, I felt like crying. There's some days I did cry, but, uh, but there's something beautiful about that, to know that, even with all that challenge, I was growing, and I could see I could help a lot. I could learn how to help. I should better put it. That first year, I feel like I was just learning a lot, but it was showing me, it was helping me become the person I wanted to become, to help the people and support the people in my community and around me. So did that at the same time while I was like doing practices of meditation, mindfulness. I came to Long Beach and became a part of a monastery. That kind of hand in hand, the service, intense work at City Year, but at the same time, the centering meditative work of my monastic practice, they were kind of showing me how to be able to be in both worlds, to stay balanced and centered, but at the same time, take that and generate that out and give that to others that I'm around, and really show that they're one and the same. They're just kind of two halves of the same coin. And then that led to working as a staff member with City Year. And I worked there after my first year, like a good 6.5 years in staff, where we got to know each other, and it just kind of kept growing on all those themes, and I just really saw the importance of working in community, working in collaboration, staying balanced and centered, and being sustainable in the service work, not burning out, just really building that fire to keep it going.
It's a great segue in some ways. And I recall, Emmanuel, there's times, and we were doing recruitment work, and, we had numbers and et cetera. We were trying to sort of hit for upcoming cores. And I would always see you and say, he's so calm. What is he doing that we're not doing? And I think in some ways, in conversation and us getting to know each other and work together, I started to get a little bit more clarification of how you're finding that balance. And I think through that, you introduced me to meditation, which again, has like been having a lasting impact on my life. So we'd love to hear, when did that first start for you, the idea of mindfulness, and how has it continued to shape your work in life? I know you started to talk a little bit about that, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about your introduction to it, because I know it was certainly impacted me when you introduced it to me.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it kind of started back in college, when I was kind of having that experience of knowing I didn't want to work in a corporate space, didn't want to work in aerospace. At the same time, I was, trying to look for a deeper purpose in life. And I think for me that, I think there's a lot of different ways people find a path to something greater and something they can resonate with and connect with. And for me, I kind of went through it with the science route, looking at quantum physics and just seeing that there was so much more in life. And then that got me looking into metaphysics, and that got me looking into, also studying the life of Gandhi and MLK, these service titans that they also had a grounding in spiritual practice. And I kind of was like, there has to be something to that. So I started exploring, dabbling in meditation, breathing, different practices. And I reached a point where I kind of wanted something more. And that also led me to finding community, finding people who were doing these practices too, people who were finding a connection to something higher, to the source, to the divine, to God, in a way that not only was it a intellectual belief, which was very important, but it was also, showing practical steps and practices like meditation and other things to get my mind quiet enough to have that communication, that connection to something higher. And having that, I really then started to lean on when I came out to LA and started to do this work with City Year, because service is tough. It's a nice thought of like service sounds like a good idea, but then actually helping people, I mean, it's humbling. You really see the things you don't know. You really see the things you don't know how to deal with. You see the injustices that can just seem just huge and insurmountable. And, it really tries you. And I think that gave me the motivation to then really go deeper into these practices of meditation with the monastery and the community that I found out here in Long Beach, because I realized I wanted to make a difference, but I couldn't do it to the level and degree that I wanted to as I was. And I needed to figure out a way to, get myself balanced. How can you really help people if you're not in a space to help people, if you don't feel like you have what you need? I found it necessary to be able to breathe, to center, to practice mindfulness, meditation, all these techniques and practices, and do it in community to rejuvenate and to charge myself to then be able to go into the field. And, it's like the battlefield, and just be able to help people as they're struggling, they're hurting, deal with the ups and downs, the challenges. And then I became more and more reliant on these practices to center because of how demanding and challenging the work could be. And I think by the time we were together in recruitment, I really came to a point where I really saw that was essential. It makes me actually think of a brief story from Gandhi. He was like a real role model, and I read his books as I was starting on this path. And I remember there's this person, a news reporter, interviewing him. And this is at the height of like the civil rights struggle that he has going on in India to free India from British colonial rule. And he's just, coordinating thousands of people, doing mass movements. I mean, he's in the middle of it. And this news reporter asks him, and he says, I heard that in a daily practice, you do 1 hour of meditation a day. And he said, that's a lot of meditation. He's like, what do you do though when like things are, intense, when situations arise, you're making this big movement. What do you do on days like that? And Gandhi like looks at him and he's like, right. On days like that, where there's just so much going on, that's when I do 2 hours of meditation a day. And that always stuck with me. And it was like, I think the tendency is, when things get busy and life gets intense, to, put some of this stuff aside. And then it's like, okay, let me handle life. But I've really found, especially through my teachers that I've studied with in my monastery, that it's those practices to go inward are the key to be able to handle the stuff in life. So when you have more going on in life, that's when you need to go more in. You need to go more in connection to something higher, because that's going to get you through these challenges. That is the key. So yeah, I think that's kind of how they intertwined by the time we got together, and I started teaching you some breathing and teaching, whoever I would, and learning myself, because I was continuously learning, still am, and just showing that this stuff really works. It isn't just woo woo, it isn't out there, but it's actually essential,
Yeah, and I think as you're talking about sort of both the external but also the internal turmoil that we all sort of deal with in some ways, trying to identify our greater purpose, just brings forth a common theme that I've had throughout the conversations with particularly men who have had the AmeriCorps service experience. It's just having that inner turmoil and trying to find that greater purpose. And it also speaks to that evolution and then continuing to evolve. And I would love to talk a little bit about more recently, you're transitioning to that connection between both gardening and mindfulness teaching, and that blending of both nature, education, and well-being. What inspired that connection, Emmanuel? again, I know that you're always on the cusp of understanding how do we understand our internal turmoil and the things that impact us. We'd love to hear, like, how did that connection happen for you, both the idea of gardening and mindfulness? I think find it very intriguing.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a big factor of it was my wife. So she's always been connected to nature, always just had a love for plants, hiking, doing some of those activities. And myself growing up in the city, I never really had, that much exposure, nor, interest, or maybe people that kind of inspired interest in those areas. So I never really gravitated towards it. And being together with her, definitely I've, picked up a lot, but there was always kind of this like access, or this barrier to access to feel connected with it. And in the pandemic, when 2020 rolled around, I think my mind was also forward thinking of like, what do we do to take care of ourselves, to eat, to do all that stuff, just on a very basic fundamental level. And at that time, with my wife and at our monastery, we were redoing the garden, and it kind of all came together where we were learning a little bit about how do you restore soil and fix and help bring life to soil that maybe had been covered or has been dead for years. And we had this area that was just concrete and asphalt in our community that we decided to want to transform, and that meant we had to learn. So we started to dive into it, and kind of working with my wife to dive into this world. It really started to open up a way I felt I could access it, where I could see, wow, that there's so much knowledge here that we've just been disconnected from or forgotten as people. Many people, there's definitely people who have it or have access to it. I think especially people in the city and the inner city, nonetheless, that you just don't know the power of nature, the wisdom of nature, the way it all functions, and to see the beauty of community and systems and how everything works together. And as I started to learn this, it just opened my eyes to seeing this is a really important base of knowledge. Not only does it teach you a lot in terms of, how to work with others, how nature works, the cycles of, rest, for instance, like that, just rest. In our work society, it's go, go, go. But to see there's cycles of growth, and then things pause and rest and regroup and gather energy, and then they grow again. And to see that that's a healthy way to approach not only nature, but life and work. So I could see there was a lot to learn from this, and that just kind of lit a fire over the last few years. And me and my wife decided to do a permaculture design course online. We did a 1-year course, started to learn all about all this. Then it went into, now, how do we share this with others? How do we show other people to grow? I mean, dude, I'm talking about reading books about soil science, and I'm over here geeking about like chemicals and molecules and soil biology and fungi. But it's so exciting because it's like it's how we live, it's how we eat, it's how nature forms, and that has then inspired me to want to help other people. And I really see mindfulness and meditation, it all connects. They're all the same systems of life, and once you understand how systems of life work, it not only helps you in the external world, whether you're growing food, making medicine, doing whatever, but it helps in your internal world because you realize we're part of the system of life too. And if you can learn from the lessons out there, you can apply it inward too. And I found it's been an easier way to maybe introduce some people to practices like meditation or mindfulness, because you can see the plants, you can see the growth. And if you can see it happening there, you can realize it happens with you, and you need those same practices as well.
Yeah, I think I'm learning more and more about, particularly early education, how that's emerging, the idea of incorporating that into education. And I also, one thing I love about you, Emmanuel, is that I know you're sharing that information and then helping others understand like the impact that both gardening and mindfulness can have on our well-being. And I want to transition as we start to close our conversation to lean into a segment where we like to shine a light on a service type. And if that's someone who's made a small or big impact on you in life, I would love to give you the space to recognize that person and shine a light on the service type in your life.
Thanks. I'd really just have to shine a light on my 2 meditation teachers. They're the ones when I came out to Long Beach at my monastery, I started to study with. And these 2 women have been doing and living these practices for their whole adult lives. And by the time that I met them and encountered them, it was inspiring to see individuals who themselves were helping thousands and thousands of people annually, like in so many different ways, whether giving food, whether teaching them how to hold their mind in balance, whether helping them through, challenging life situations, and to just be with them and see them work with a multitude of people from all different backgrounds and beliefs, and do work that myself, if I were doing that, I'd be drained, I'd be exhausted, I'd be dead tired. And from City Year, I felt like, oh, this is even like 10 times more intense than the work I was doing. Yet to see them kind of like seemingly effortlessly just glide through it and help people and never be, overwhelmed. It was just never phased. And for me, I was like, how do you do that? And then, learning these practices, mindfulness, meditation, different techniques that they were teaching, I really could see, oh, this is how you help people. This is how you serve. And literally, I've seen them helping all the years that I've been a student, and from decades before, like 50 years of service that they've been doing, and literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that they helped physically, mentally, and spiritually. And that became a role model for me to build a consistency, that it wasn't just good enough to do service, 1 year, one time, but it's like, how do I make a life of service? And they really were kind of those living examples that showed me that that's possible.
Thanks for sharing that. And I think it's always powerful to sort of observe and see how other people sort of lead and what you can learn from them. And I really appreciate you for shining a light on the two individuals that you highlighted today. As we conclude, Emmanuel, is there anything that you'd like to share with our listeners, perhaps your social media handles or any projects you're currently working on, things that you might be interested in? I definitely want to give you this space to allow our audience to stay connected with you.
Thank you. First and foremost, I do some weekly meditations. Mondays, I have like a black and breathing meditation I've been doing for the last like 4.5 years. So if anybody ever wants to check that out, feel free to hit me up. My email address is Emmanuel, Emmanuel, at naturewise, naturewise, design, design.com. So yeah, just reach out to me. I can definitely let you know about that or other meditations going on. I'm working part-time with an organization called Green Arrow Colab, and we do great work where we're teaching gardening and mindfulness to youth who've been systems impacted. So whether they've been in the foster care system, or most of the youth we work with have been formerly incarcerated, like young adults, and teaching them the value of these service practices of gardening and learning how to still and go in with themselves. So, if there's anything like that people are interested, I'm always loving to talk to people on how to connect them to either doing work like that, to do work on themselves, mindfulness or meditation, different service work. Yeah, I'm just very open, and feel free to reach out to me if you want to talk about any of those areas. But I really feel it's important, whatever it is, whether you're doing gardening, mindfulness, whatever, however you're approaching service, that you have some way of connecting with something that fuels you and makes you feel that there's a deeper purpose than just the actions, because, service work is demanding, and you also need examples and role models to show you how to do it in different ways too. So please take some time, anybody listening, to find practices that work to help you center, to help you feel fulfilled, to help you feel grounded or connected to something higher, because to really make a difference, that's the key. Actually, there's one quote I just wanted to share, and it's a quote I think about with this type of work. And it's a quote from Albert Einstein. I like this one. He says, "When you examine the lives of the most influential people who have ever walked among us, you discover one thread that winds through them all. They have been aligned first with their spiritual nature, and only then with their physical selves." So if you can find some way to connect to something bigger, that then will automatically translate to you making a real big impact in the world.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And it definitely speaks to that continued quest to find your greater purpose. So with that, I want to say thank you for taking time to join the podcast and for sharing your insights and your experiences. Listeners, be sure to connect with Emmanuel on the platforms he highlighted. I'll also make sure to put it in the show notes. And then with that, until next time, keep the conversation flowing, keep service front and center, and continue shining bright in your communities. This is Service Titans. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for joining us as we explored the inspiring journeys of Black men in AmeriCorps. Keep the conversation going by connecting with us on social media. Until next time, stay committed, stay courageous, and keep striving to make a difference. This is Service Titans, where every story told is a testament to the power of service. Thank you for listening.